Most people think a backyard is too small to change their life, too small to feed a family, too small to make real money, too small to do anything except grow a few tomatoes, keep a grill, and spend every Saturday cutting grass that gives absolutely nothing back. That's the belief almost everybody starts with, and it's exactly why most backyards stay expensive. Because if you think a backyard is just a patch of space behind the house, you'll use it like space. But if you understand it as a system, everything changes. A system does not ask, "What can I fit back here?" A system asks, "How can each piece feed the next?" That's the difference between a yard that costs you money and a yard that starts quietly returning it. That's the difference between a few random raised beds and a living machine. And once you see that machine clearly, something surprising happens. You stop looking at your property as decoration. You start seeing it as infrastructure. The herb bed becomes inventory. The coop becomes a fertility engine. The berry hedge becomes privacy, pollinator forage, and a product line. The greenhouse becomes a seasonal cash printer. The compost pile becomes the center of the whole operation. The rain tank becomes insurance. The mushroom rack becomes a high-value shaded crop. The cut flower strip becomes weekly income. And suddenly the question is no longer whether a backyard can produce something meaningful. The question becomes how many times 1 square foot can work before the season ends. Because that's the secret almost nobody talks about. A self-sustaining backyard doesn't get powerful by being huge. It gets powerful by being layered. It doesn't rely on one miracle crop. It doesn't depend on one viral side hustle. It doesn't need a tractor payment, a giant barn, or 10 acres of open pasture. What it needs is integration, a handful of well-placed systems, a tight layout, good timing, low waste, and outputs that stack. Food for the house, feed for the animals, soil for the garden, products for local customers, cash every month. That's how small land beats big assumptions. And in this video, I want to walk you inside the kind of backyard system most people never notice. From the street, it doesn't look like a farm. It looks quiet, tidy, ordinary even. But behind the fence, it's doing something remarkable. It's producing food, reducing bills, recycling waste, and generating multiple small streams of income that together can build towards something serious. Not because any single part is dramatic, but because all of it works together. We're going to break down exactly what that system looks like, how the pieces connect, why most people fail when they try to copy this idea, and how a backyard that seems modest on the surface can grow into a system quietly paying $6,000 a month. Not overnight, not by magic, and definitely not by doing everything at once, but by building the right loops in the right order. The first mistake, treating the backyard like a collection of projects. This is where almost everybody loses. They start with enthusiasm, a couple of raised beds, maybe a chicken coop, a compost tumbler, some herbs by the kitchen, a fruit tree or two they picked up on sale, a greenhouse kit they assemble one spring and barely use by summer. On paper, it looks like progress. In reality, it's often just clutter with good intentions. Because projects are not the same thing as systems. A project stands alone. A system connects. A project gives you one result. A system multiplies results. A project usually depends on your constant input. A system begins to create its own momentum. That's why 2 backyards can have the same square footage, the same climate, the same budget, even the same number of beds and animals, and still perform completely differently. One feels like work. The other feels like flow. One constantly asks for more money. The other slowly reduces the amount of money leaving the property. One produces bits and pieces. The other produces a rhythm, and rhythm is what creates stable income. If you study small, successful home producers, the thing that stands out is not that they have rare land or secret knowledge. It's that they stop thinking in separate categories. They don't see chickens, compost, seedlings, berries, eggs, herbs, flowers, and preserves as isolated enterprises. They see material moving through a loop, kitchen scraps into hens, hen manure into compost, compost into beds, beds into herbs and greens, herbs into bundles, teas, salts, soaps, and starts, flowers into bouquets and pollinator support, pollinators into better fruit set, fruit into fresh sales, jam, syrup, and freezer inventory, shade under the berry rows into mushroom production, prunings into kindling or biochar feedstock, rainwater into irrigation resilience. Nothing is just one thing. That is the operating principle. And once you understand that, the goal shifts. You are no longer asking, what should I grow? You are asking, what can I connect? That is the real beginning of a self-sustaining backyard. What $6,000 a month actually means now. Before we go any further, let's bring this down to earth. When people hear a number like $6,000 a month, they tend to imagine one of two extremes. Either they assume it's fake, or they assume it requires a huge commercial setup. But that number becomes far more believable when you stop imagining one product carrying the whole load. That's the wrong model. A productive backyard doesn't become valuable by betting everything on one crop, one species, or one seasonal rush. It becomes valuable by stacking smaller streams that mature at different speeds, peak at different times, and support one another. Think about it this way. If someone says, I make $6,000 a month from my backyard, most people assume there must be one big hidden engine, a premium microgreen business, a giant cut flower account, a breeding program, a nursery operation. And yes, sometimes there is one lead stream, but in the strongest backyard systems, the money is layered. Maybe spring is driven by seedlings, plant starts, compost, and early herbs. Maybe summer brings eggs, bouquets, berries, fresh vegetables, mushrooms, honey, and workshops. Maybe fall leans into preserves, garlic braids, herbal products, storage crops, breeding stock, and cold hardy starts. Maybe winter shifts towards soap, salves, dried teas, shelf-stable pantry goods, consultation, seed packs, rabbit manure fertilizer, and pre-orders for spring. That's a completely different way of thinking about income. It's not one loud payday. It's dozens of quiet paydays. And that matters, because quiet systems are often the most stable. They don't need to go viral. They don't need one perfect season. They don't need a farmer's market miracle every Saturday. They need repeatable outputs. That's why the real question is not, can a backyard make $6,000 a month? The better question is, can a backyard hold enough complementary enterprises to average that number over time? And the answer is yes. If the layout is tight, the enterprise mix is smart, the products are chosen for margin instead of just novelty, and the owner understands that self-sustaining does not mean passive, it means circular. It means each part reduces pressure on the others. It means the system gets stronger as connections deepen. So, let's go inside that system. System 1. The daily harvest zone. Every serious backyard economy begins with the zone that gets touched every day. Not because it's glamorous, but because frequency creates consistency, and consistency creates cash. This is the area closest to the house, the place where high-turnover crops live: salad greens, cut and come-again lettuces, spinach, arugula, basil, cilantro, parsley, scallions, tender kale, chives, mint, quick roots, edible flowers, the crops you harvest often, the crops that recover quickly, the crops customers notice immediately because they look fresh, smell alive, and feel different from what they buy at a store. This zone does two jobs at once. First, it cuts your food bill fast. Second, it trains you to move through the backyard like a manager, not just a hobby gardener. That sounds small, but it changes everything. A daily harvest zone forces observation. You spot pests earlier. You see moisture problems sooner. You notice bolting, disease, nutrient deficiencies, and wasted space before they snowball. More importantly, you build the habit of consistent output, and output is the muscle that every later income stream depends on. A lot of backyard growers skip this discipline because they get excited by bigger ideas, fruit trees, livestock, greenhouse projects, specialty crops. But the humble daily zone is where you learn timing. You learn succession. You learn what customers actually want. You learn how much a bed can truly produce when it is planted, cut, replanted, and protected intelligently. You also learn a hard truth. Most people underuse small beds. A tightly managed bed near the house can produce again and again because it stays in your sightline, and anything in your sightline gets better care. That's why this zone often becomes the most efficient square footage on the property. And while the harvests here may look modest, one basket at a time, the economics add up quickly. A few herb bundles here, a couple mixed salad bags there, specialty basil for a home cook, fresh garnish packs for a local cafe, kitchen herbs dried into winter tea blends, small, repeatable outputs, nothing dramatic. But cash loves consistency, and this zone is where consistency begins. System 2, the seedling house that prints spring money. If there is one backyard structure that regularly punches far above its size, it's the propagation space, a greenhouse, a hoop house, a tunnel, even a well-organized enclosed porch with proper shelving and light. Why? Because plant starts compress value. A seed costs pennies, a healthy seedling sells for dollars, and those dollars arrive during one of the most important moments of the year, spring, when people are eager, optimistic, and ready to spend. That alone makes seedlings powerful. But the real advantage is even bigger. A propagation system feeds the rest of the property. It fills your own beds cheaply. It lets you start replacement plants on schedule. It gives you transplants for succession. It creates gifts, trades, backups, and experiments. And when you get good at it, it becomes one of the cleanest, fastest margin engines in the entire backyard economy. Here is where many people go wrong. They grow what they personally like. That's not a business. A profitable seedling system grows what people are nervous to start themselves, what people regularly kill and rebuy, and what people are happy to purchase when it already looks healthy and established. Tomatoes with strong stems, basil in attractive pots, pepper starts that are already hardened, medicinal herbs, pollinator packs, berry cuttings, strawberry starts, edible hanging baskets, companion planting kits, container garden bundles. That's where backyard scale becomes an advantage again. A large nursery must move volume. A backyard propagator can move trust. When someone buys from a small grower, they're often not just buying the plant. They're buying confidence. They want to know, will this survive? A backyard system that consistently sells sturdy, vigorous starts becomes known, and reputation matters more than square footage. Now imagine the numbers when that propagation space is organized well. Hundreds of starts moving over a few peak months. Higher value specialty plants mixed with reliable staples. Upsells into compost, herb bundles, garden guides, worm castings, or planting services. Then imagine what happens when the unsold stock is not a loss, but gets transplanted into your own production beds, traded locally, or turned into later season products. That's what makes this system resilient. Nothing is stranded. And when nothing is stranded, waste turns into optionality. That's how a greenhouse stops being a hobby luxury and starts acting like a spring cash engine. System 3. The chicken loop that pays 3 ways. Most people calculate chickens wrong. They ask one question. Do eggs cover feed? That's too narrow. A chicken loop becomes powerful when you stop judging it as a single output animal. Eggs are only one layer. The real value comes from stacking functions. The flock takes kitchen scraps. It turns damaged vegetables into protein. It scratches through spent beds. It reduces insect pressure. It produces manure for compost. It creates saleable eggs. It sometimes produces hatching eggs or young birds. It draws customers, and if managed correctly, it becomes one of the most visible symbols of credibility in the whole backyard brand. People trust food systems more when they can see part of the loop. That matters. Now, does that mean every chicken owner makes good money? Not even close. Most backyard flocks are leak points, bad breed choices, too many non-productive birds, overbuilt coops, feed waste, no pasture rotation, no branding, no premium positioning, no thought given to color variety, carton presentation, pickup convenience, or consistent customer communication. That is hobby logic. System logic is different. A system chooses hardy, productive birds suited to the climate. A system matches flock size to both egg demand and compost capacity. A system places the coop where bedding, manure, and feed movement makes sense. A system captures waste. A system uses deep litter strategically. A system turns seasonal abundance, especially spring and summer eggs, into preserved inventory, baked goods, breeding potential, or loyal customers. A system knows that the carton is part of the product. Clean eggs, reliable pickup, a recognizable label, a story people can repeat to friends. These details sound tiny, but backyard income is built on tiny details. And here's where the chicken loop starts paying 3 ways. It pays in direct product through egg sales. It pays in fertility through manure and bedding transformed into compost. And it pays in customer acquisition because eggs bring people back regularly, giving you recurring contact with the exact kinds of buyers who may later purchase herbs, seedlings, honey, jam, flowers, or workshops. That recurring contact is incredibly valuable. One weekly egg customer is not just an egg customer. They are a relationship. And relationships are where a backyard system becomes durable. System 4. Compost as the financial heart of the property. Compost is one of the least glamorous topics in the backyard world, which is exactly why so many people underestimate it. They talk about flowers, they talk about eggs, they talk about fruit and greenhouse crops. But if you trace the health of the entire system backward, you almost always end up here, in decomposition, in fertility cycling, in what the property can produce from its own waste stream. That is where self-sustaining becomes real. If the yard must constantly import bagged soil, bagged fertilizer, bagged mulch, and endless amendments just to stay productive, it is not really functioning as a system. It is functioning as a consumer. A mature backyard economy works hard to turn local waste into growing power. Chicken bedding, leaves, grass clippings, garden residues, kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, wood chips, rabbit manure, spoiled hay, cardboard, pulled weeds before seeds set, mushroom substrate after harvest. All of it becomes feedstock, and when you get good at compost, you're no longer simply reducing costs. You are improving everything upstream. Better seedlings, better water retention, better yields, better plant health, better flavor, better shelf life, better resilience in heat, better recovery after harvest. That's why compost deserves to be seen not as a side task, but as the financial heart of the backyard. Every bag of fertility you don't have to buy is money kept on site. Every bed that holds moisture longer saves labor and water. Every healthy crop that grows faster and cleaner becomes easier to sell, and compost itself can become a product. Not always in raw, heavy bulk form that can be labor-intensive and low-margin depending on scale, but in targeted, high-value versions. Screened compost for raised beds, worm-rich potting blend, seed-starting mixed components, top-dress packs, tea concentrate ingredients, specialty garden bundles sold alongside seedlings. This is what most beginners miss. Profit doesn't only come from what you harvest, it comes from what you no longer have to purchase. And in strong backyard systems, avoided cost is just as important as earned income. Because the more fertility the property can recycle, the more each later enterprise improves. Compost is not exciting, it is foundational. And foundational systems are what make the flashy systems believable. System 5. The perennial spine that keeps working. When you're busy. Annual crops are wonderful. They're flexible, fast, profitable, responsive. But they also demand constant attention. That's why every smart backyard system needs a perennial spine. Fruit trees, berry hedges, asparagus, rhubarb, hardy herbs, edible shrubs, nurse plants, nitrogen fixers, living windbreaks, plants that establish slowly but then show up every season, asking less and giving more. Perennials stabilize the property in ways annual growers often discover only after they burn out. They anchor pollinators, they shade soil, they reduce erosion, they create privacy, they soften temperature swings, they provide mulch material and prunings, they create habitat, they stretch harvest windows, they produce products that feel special and seasonal. And perhaps most importantly, They continue working even when you are too busy to give daily attention to every square foot. That matters more than people realize. A backyard can look productive in one great season and still be fragile. Perennials create depth, and depth is what makes the system less dependent on perfect timing every single week. Now, if someone plants 2 random apple trees and 1 blueberry bush, that's not yet a perennial income system. To become a system, the planting needs design. Different ripening windows, different canopy heights, different root behaviors, pollinator support, access for harvest, protection from bird pressure, possible understory use, processing plan for glut periods. Fresh sales when quality is highest, preserves when volume peaks, freezing when labor is tight, value-added products for off-season cash. That is the difference between a yard with fruit and a yard with a perennial spine. And from an income standpoint, perennials do something subtle but powerful. They create anticipation. People wait for strawberries. They ask about elderberries. They look forward to figs, currants, blackberries, pears, cherries, mulberries, and specialty plums. That anticipation becomes market pull. And market pull is easier to monetize than trying to convince people to care about something they never asked for. Perennials also help create beauty. That may sound secondary, but beauty sells. A backyard that looks abundant attracts curiosity. Curiosity brings conversation. Conversation brings customers, and customers who emotionally connect with the place often buy more than customers who only care about price. That's the hidden role of the perennial spine. It is not just yield, it is atmosphere, and atmosphere has value. System 6. Herbs, teas, and tiny crops with big margins. If someone had to build a backyard income system with limited land, limited time, and limited money, one of the smartest places to look would be herbs, because herbs do something that large commodity crops usually cannot. They compress margin into very little space. Fresh herbs sell, dried herbs sell, tea blends sell, seasoning mixes sell, herb starts sell, bath bundles sell, salves sell, floral garnish sells, holiday gifts sell, and the same bed can serve multiple of those streams depending on timing. A spring bed produces starts, a summer bed produces fresh bundles, a late season flush becomes drying stock, surplus becomes blended products, saved seed becomes next year's propagation material. That is exactly the sort of layered output a backyard system needs. The other reason herbs work so well is that they pair beautifully with almost everything else on the property. They attract beneficial insects, they border vegetables, they sit near the kitchen, they tuck into greenhouse edges, they fill awkward spaces, they grow in containers, they perfume pathways, they support pollinators for nearby fruit set, and they help transform raw agricultural outputs into finished goods. That last part matters. A dozen eggs is a product. A carton of eggs with a recipe card and a packet of poultry-safe dried herbs for kitchen roasting is a story. Fresh mint is a product. A dried evening tea blend with lemon balm, mint, and chamomile in simple craft packaging is a brand. Garlic is a product. A braided garlic and herb kitchen bundle is an experience. Backyard systems do well when they stop selling only ingredients and begin selling usefulness, convenience, beauty, and ritual. Herbs are perfect for that. They also help smooth seasonality. When the fresh garden slows down, dried inventory keeps working. And because dried products are lighter, more stable, and easier to store than many fresh crops, they fit especially well into small spaces. This is another place where people undersell themselves. They assume small means cheap. But small, hand-produced, beautifully handled, hyper-fresh, local, and thoughtfully packaged often means premium. That premium is not automatic. It has to be earned through quality and trust. But once it's earned, herbs become one of the easiest ways for a backyard to multiply the value of its square footage. System 7. Mushrooms in the shade. Nobody else is using. Now let's talk about one of the most overlooked pieces in a compact backyard economy. Shade. Most people treat shade as dead space. That's a huge miss, because any backyard with fences, sheds, Tree lines, covered sides of buildings, or tucked away humid corners is holding square footage that annual vegetables may hate, but fungi love. And fungi are interesting because they allow you to add a high-value crop without competing directly for prime sunny bed space. That alone makes them attractive. But there's more. Mushrooms fit backyard systems unusually well because they can be tucked into edges and under structures, and the spent substrate can often re-enter the fertility cycle in some form. That means they don't just produce a saleable crop. They also produce material that still has downstream use. Now, mushrooms are not easy money. That phrase ruins good enterprises. They require cleanliness, timing, and consistency. But in the right setup, they offer something backyard growers desperately need: diversity that doesn't cannibalize core garden space. Fresh gourmet mushrooms can sell at premium prices. Dried mushrooms extend shelf life. Grow kits create gifts and educational products. Workshops create another layer. And when the backyard already has a customer base buying eggs, herbs, seedlings, and flowers, mushrooms can slide into that basket as a specialty add-on rather than needing a whole new market from scratch. This is the power of customer overlap. The best backyard systems don't build 10 unrelated audiences. They build one trusting local audience and keep giving it reasons to buy again. Mushrooms can do that beautifully. They feel special. They photograph well. They connect to home cooking, and they reinforce the deeper brand message of the property. This place is productive, surprising, and intelligently designed. That message is worth money. System 8. Flowers that sell the farm. Before the food. Does a lot of practical growers dismiss flowers because flowers seem ornamental and food seems serious? That's a mistake. Flowers do far more than decorate. They attract pollinators. They lure beneficial insects. They soften the look of the property. They turn pickups into experiences. They boost social sharing. They widen your customer base. And when you choose the right varieties, they become one of the most profitable products per square foot in the whole yard. Cut flowers are especially powerful in a small land system because they move emotion, not just calories. People buy kale when they need kale. People buy flowers because they want to feel something. That means cut flowers can hold stronger margins than many staple crops. The key is choosing workhorse varieties and designing the flower strip as part of the system, not as a separate vanity project. Flowers along a fence line can double as beauty and privacy. Flower borders near vegetable zones can increase visitation by pollinators. Edible flowers can bridge visual appeal and culinary use. Dried flowers can extend inventory. Bouquets can travel with CSA-style pickups, egg pickups, workshop days, and holiday promotions. Again, the principle is stacking. One strip of flowers can generate direct sales, support fruit set, elevate photography, attract customers, and increase the perceived value of the whole property. That perceived value matters because people rarely buy only the product in front of them. They buy what the product seems to represent: care, abundance, craft, seasonality, beauty, competence. Flowers help communicate all of that before a customer tastes a single thing, and that makes the rest of the yard easier to monetize. System 9. Rabbits, manure, and the hidden economics of small livestock. If chickens are the visible symbol of many backyard systems, rabbits are often the quiet utility players. They don't fit every property or every person, but when managed well, they can contribute in ways that go beyond meat production alone. The first overlooked asset is manure. Rabbit manure is one of the cleanest fertility products in the small homestead world, because it can often be used more directly than hot manures that require longer processing. That makes it attractive for gardeners. Packaged modestly and honestly, it becomes a targeted product. But its real strength is on-site use. It improves beds, feeds worms, supports potting blends, strengthens the fertility loop. Then there's breeding stock, then pet market rabbits in some regions, if done ethically and lawfully, then pelts, where legal and culturally appropriate, then educational value for families visiting or learning, then meat for households that use it. They turn feed into fertility. That's a recurring theme here. The most valuable parts of a backyard system are often the ones that create optionality. System 10, value-added products, are where the backyard gets louder than its size. Here is the moment many backyard systems level up. They stop selling only raw output. Fresh produce is wonderful. Fresh eggs are wonderful. Fresh herbs are wonderful. But raw products are often the starting point, not the ceiling. The ceiling rises when the backyard begins turning harvests into forms with better margins, longer shelf life, and stronger identity. Jam from the berry glut, herbal vinegar from excess herbs, garlic powder from late-season surplus, dried tea blends from mint, lemon balm, chamomile, and tulsi, syrups from berries or flowers, soap with herbs and honey, calendula salve, bouquet subscriptions, pickle jars, chili flakes, rose salt, gift baskets, holiday pantry boxes, spring garden starter bundles. These are not just products, they are multiplication tools. They let you capture more value from what the land already produced. They let you use imperfect but still excellent material. They extend the selling season. And they protect you from the brutal reality of fresh product perishability. That is huge. A backyard is small enough that every lost harvest hurts. Value-added systems reduce that pressure. They also make branding easier. A person may buy a bunch of parsley once, but they may become loyal to a recognizable tea blend, a signature herb salt, or a seasonal jam collection. Brand loyalty is not a side issue. It is one of the only ways a small producer competes without racing to the bottom on price. Now, value-added products do require attention to food laws, labeling rules, local regulations, safe processing, and honest marketing. That matters. This is not a shortcut around those responsibilities. But within the rules, value-added goods are often where a backyard begins to earn beyond the logic of raw, square footage. Because now you are not just selling land output. You are selling land output plus processing, story, packaging, convenience, and trust. And those layers are where margin lives. The layout rule that changes everything. At this point, you can probably see the pattern: eggs, herbs, seedlings, flowers, mushrooms, compost, fruit, small livestock, preserves, all useful, all potentially profitable, but none of them perform at their best if the layout is wrong. This is one of the biggest lessons from high-performing small properties. Distance is a tax. Bad placement is a tax. Poor access is a tax. If you have to carry water too far, you lose money. If you have to walk feed across the whole yard, you lose time. If your compost is nowhere near your biggest biomass sources, you create drag. If your propagation area is inconvenient, you use it less. If the pickup area for customers disrupts the private life of the household, burnout creeps in. The strongest backyard systems are designed around movement. What gets touched daily goes close. What gets harvested often stays visible. What makes mess stays manageable. What needs shade gets shade. What creates fertility stays near where fertility gets used. What customers see first should make the place feel orderly, alive, and trustworthy. That is design. And design is what makes small land feel bigger than it is. A badly organized acre can underperform a tightly organized quarter acre. That's how important placement is. This is also why some backyard systems quietly look effortless. They are not effortless. They are friction-reduced. And friction reduction is one of the most underrated forms of profit. Every repeated inconvenience costs attention. Every wasted step costs time. Every awkward workflow makes you less likely to stay consistent. The people who keep these systems going year after year are not superhuman. They simply remove as much friction as possible so the right actions become easy to repeat. That's what gives the impression of calm productivity. Why most people never reach the income they could. So if the opportunity is real, why do so many backyard systems never become financially meaningful? Usually because they fail in one of 5 ways. First, they expand too fast. They try to run chickens, bees, microgreens, rabbits, preserves, flowers, fruit trees, a greenhouse, and a market schedule all in one season. That is not ambition. That is dilution. A strong system matures in layers. Second, they choose low-margin work because it feels familiar. They grow what everybody else grows. They sell what everybody else sells. They compete with larger, cheaper producers instead of leaning into freshness, rarity, beauty, locality, or integrated bundles. Third, they ignore layout. They keep adding without redesigning. Soon, every chore takes longer than it should, and exhaustion replaces excitement. Fourth, they fail to build repeat customers. They keep chasing one-time sales instead of relationships. But in backyard business, relationships are oxygen. And fifth, they confuse visible busyness with profitable momentum. This is the hardest one. A yard can look full, busy, active, picturesque, and still be financially weak. True strength shows up in the books, in the pantry, in the soil, in the repeat orders, and in the fact that the property grows more capable each season instead of more dependent. That's the scoreboard that matters. What a real $6,000 month might actually look like. Now let's make this concrete, not fantasy concrete, backyard concrete. Imagine a mature, well-run backyard entering peak season with several systems already established. Egg sales bring steady weekly cash. Seedlings are still moving. Bouquet subscriptions are active. Fresh herbs and salad mixes go to regular customers. Berry harvest is arriving. Mushrooms are producing in shaded cycles. A small greenhouse is full of succession starts and a few premium specialty plants. Tea blends, herb salts, and preserves are available as add-ons. A workshop or two runs on weekends. A handful of customers place larger pantry box orders. That month might look something like this: a few $100s from eggs, a strong push from flowers, a very strong push from seedlings or plants starts in spring, steady herb and greens income, a seasonal spike from berries, specialty margin from mushrooms, smaller but important lifts from value-added goods, then occasional higher ticket weeks from workshops, garden consults, or bundled orders. No single line has to do all the work. That is the point. And because different streams rise at different times, the system doesn't collapse if one product underperforms. That is what makes the number believable. The backyard is not being asked to be one thing. It is being asked to be many complementary things at once. That's how it grows past hobby scale, not by becoming industrial, by becoming intelligently dense. The emotional payoff nobody sees on the spreadsheet. There's one more reason these systems matter, and it has nothing to do with the market, or rather, not only the market, because the income is only part of the story. Yes, $6,000 a month is attractive, but a backyard like this also changes the emotional texture of everyday life. You walk outside and there is dinner. There is tea. There is mulch. There is compost. There are eggs under warm feathers. There are flowers opening before breakfast. There is fruit ripening at the fence. There are starts hardening off for sale. There is a rain tank full after a storm. There is a shelf inside the house lined with things that came from the land you thought was too small to matter. That changes a person. It makes the household feel less fragile, less dependent, more awake. Even the money feels different because it came through stewardship instead of just extraction. You didn't squeeze it out of the land. You designed the land to circulate value, and that creates a different kind of wealth. Not just income, capability. That word matters. A backyard system like this increases capability. The capability to feed yourself. The capability to absorb shocks. The capability to reduce waste. The capability to meet neighbors through trade. The capability to create products with your own hands. The capability to watch a space become smarter every year. That kind of capability is why so many people start chasing a garden and end up building a life. Where to start? If your backyard is still mostly grass. If your backyard is mostly grass right now, do not make the classic mistake of trying to build the finished vision all at once. That's how systems die early. Start with the loops that teach the most and improve the rest. A daily harvest zone, a compost system that actually functions, a propagation area, even if tiny, a few premium herbs, maybe a small flock, if legal and appropriate. Then watch what customers and the property itself respond to. Build from the signals, not from fantasy. If herbs move fast, expand them. If flowers create attention, deepen that strip. If seedlings sell out, strengthen propagation. If eggs create return visits, build bundles around them. If berries thrive in your climate, increase the perennial spine. This is another thing successful backyard operators do well. They listen to feedback from the land, from customers, from their own energy levels. Because an enterprise that looks good online but burns you out in real life is not sustainable. And sustainability is the whole point. The goal is not to cram every profitable idea into a tiny space. The goal is to create a yard that can keep producing because the systems support the person running them, not just the other way around. That is the hidden architecture of truly successful backyard income. The backyard that quietly wins. In the end, the most impressive backyard systems are rarely the loudest ones. They are not always the prettiest on social media. They are not always the ones with the biggest claims. Often, they are quiet. They don't look like much from the road. But season after season, they keep doing the same remarkable things. Turning scraps into feed, turning feed into eggs, turning bedding into compost, turning compost into vegetables, turning herbs into products, turning flowers into customers, turning shade into mushrooms, turning spring optimism into seedling sales, turning berry gluts into winter inventory, turning a household expense zone into a household asset. That's the magic of a real self-sustaining backyard. Not that it does one thing brilliantly, but that it makes dozens of small things cooperate. And when those small things cooperate long enough, the results stop looking small. That's when the grocery bill shrinks. That's when the freezer fills. That's when the soil deepens. That's when customers return by name. That's when side income stops being random. That's when the property begins paying you back. Quietly, steadily, almost invisibly to anyone who doesn't understand what they're looking at. A basket of herbs here, a pickup of eggs there, a greenhouse bench full of starts, bouquets by the gate, berry syrup cooling in the kitchen, a compost pile steaming in the morning, rainwater stored for the next dry week, wood chips turning into soil, a little backyard acting like a living economy. And that is the part most people miss. The money does not come from forcing the yard to behave like a factory. It comes from teaching it to behave like an ecosystem with products attached. That's why the best backyard systems don't feel sterile. They feel alive, alive enough to feed the house, alive enough to create inventory, alive enough to recover from mistakes, alive enough to get better every year. So if you've been staring at your own backyard thinking it's too small, too ordinary, too limited, or too late, don't make that mistake. The size of the land is only part of the story. The real story is whether the systems talk to each other, whether the outputs stack, whether the waste cycles home, whether the space is designed for rhythm instead of randomness. Because when it is, something powerful starts happening. The backyard stops being where you spend money to maintain appearances. It becomes where you build resilience, where you lower dependence, where you create beauty that also feeds you, where you produce things people are happy to buy, where your home becomes a little more sovereign every season. And eventually, if you build it carefully enough, it becomes something few people ever expect from a simple fenced patch behind a house, a self-sustaining backyard system, quietly paying, quietly feeding, quietly proving that small land, when designed well, can do a whole lot more than most people ever imagine.